The UK finance sector is confronted with the two greatest risks it has ever faced: climate change and the collapse of nature. Both crises are intricately connected and pose existential threats.
Where we're heading to by the end of the century is potentially as extreme as civilizational collapse.
Hundreds of firefighters have been tackling blazes across the country.
Reached the 40 degrees mark for the first time in Britain.
This is some of the worst flooding that this region has seen.
This is what a warming planet looks like in reality.
New record temperatures.
A huge evacuation order is in place.
It hasn't rained here for 3 years.
Pakistan is drowning.
A humanitarian disaster of epic proportions.
The degradation of our planet is fueled by the actions of a flawed financial system.
If the financial sector in the UK was a country, it would be the world's 9th largest emitting country.
We have begun to tackle the climate crisis, but until very recently, we had completely overlooked the crisis in nature.
We're actually bottom of the G7 nations in terms of nature depletion, and the bottom 10% of all the countries in the world.
Insurance companies are looking into the future and the most likely scenarios, and they're worried.
In a nature-depleted country, simply put, we wouldn't be able to operate as a business.
To prevent the collapse of nature, the economy and society, and to contain the climate crisis, the finance sector must change its relationship with the natural world.
If we do want to navigate the challenge that's before us, the cheapest, most economically effective way of doing this is through harnessing the power of nature.
Climate change and loss of biodiversity are intricately connected, and we need to deal with them in an integrated fashion or integrated approach.
So the reason we must stop and reverse nature loss is simple. Nature underpins everything, including our climate. A healthy natural world is resilient and essential to us all. Its strength comes from the sum of its parts. Countless species in balanced ecosystems, keeping our planet livable.
Nature is providing a wide range of essential services that go right across the economy, right across society, and it's doing it for nothing.
Nature fundamentally provides us for free with clean air, clean water, natural flood defences. It pollinates our crops. It provides us with food.
And crucially, in our struggle against climate change, nature also absorbs half of the carbon dioxide humanity produces.
Natural capital is nature. We use the term natural capital to emphasise that it's an asset that provides benefits and that we depend on.
The idea of natural capital really parallels the idea of financial capital. If we look after nature's assets of forests and soils, fresh water and oceans, then those dividends can be there indefinitely for the future.
Nature is the ultimate foundation of all our commodities, all our investments, and our entire economic system.
$10 trillion per year accrue from nature globally. And over 395 million jobs will be accrued as the result of nature and services it provides by 2030.
In spite of all this, our assault on the natural world, funded by our economic system, has been increasingly devastating and relentless.
Public and private institutions or investments spend 2% of the global GDP per year on incentives which are harmful to nature.
governments globally continue environmentally damaging practices, such as subsidising fossil fuel use and over-intensive agriculture.
Our food system is by far the biggest cause of destruction of the environment. It's the biggest cause of deforestation. It's the biggest cause of the collapse of biodiversity and wildlife. It's the biggest cause of freshwater stress and freshwater scarcity. And it's the biggest cause of the collapse of aquatic life in our oceans.
It isn't just about what happens here, it's about what we're financing in coal-fired power stations in India or unsustainable fishing practices in Indonesia. It's about everything that we do as a very rich country and how our money is used globally.
Across the world, nature is in free fall. Populations of species, an indicator of healthy ecosystems, have crashed by an average of 69% since 1970. And the UK has lost more nature than almost any other nation.
Well, nature in the UK is in a pretty awful state. We've lost half of our biodiversity. 90% of our natural wetlands. 97% of our flower-rich grasslands. And 70% of our ancient woodlands have gone.
Globally, so much of our natural world is gone that we now find ourselves reaching irreversible tipping points. Points of no return, after which ecosystems are unable to function.
We don't have enough nature left to purify our rivers. We don't have enough nature to ensure long-term food security. We don't have enough nature to buffer against the effects of climate change or to catch enough carbon from the atmosphere.
We are just beginning to understand the full repercussions and risks from these tipping points, which have been dangerously downplayed or simply ignored. And already their impacts are being felt across the globe.
It is estimated that in 2021, economic losses due to natural catastrophes was $270 billion.
As climate change gets worse, as nature and biodiversity loss gets worse, those services that the ecological system provided us becomes sacrificed in a way that we then have to pay for.
In the States, you've seen examples of where we're having to artificially pollinate crops or transport bees to different areas of the state to pollinate nut crops. And that's just one small example of where every business that we rely on for our own livelihoods will be stressed the more we put nature under stress.
By destroying the services that nature provides for free, we will shatter the foundations of our economies and never reach net zero.
It's now 5 minutes to midnight. We need a programme of screaming urgency to reduce and reverse our impact on the planet's life support systems.
We are already too late to reverse the damage completely. The fate of nature and humanity are in our hands. So the mission is clear. In order for our economy to thrive long-term, the finance sector must tackle the nature crisis. And it must start now.
Roughly 400 trillion of capital is out there in the global financial system. We know that is many times what is needed to solve the climate crisis, the nature crisis simultaneously.
We need to invest at least $11 trillion in nature between now and 2050 to have any hope of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees.
Scientists have also already told us that 37% of climate mitigation and adaptation will come from nature. or biodiversity.
When you look at it from a business perspective, what you're building is long-term sustainable value, sustainable businesses, sustainable income.
And there is nothing to prevent us from taking the first steps. This can be the dawn of a new economic era where businesses understand and address their impacts on nature and their risks from ignoring it. We already have a way to do this through transition plans.
Transition plans are a relatively new idea, and it's encouraging companies to set out how they plan to transition to a future in which their business is aligned with the Paris Agreement. Every company, every sector in the world will need to transition on an unprecedented scale.
A transition plan for us is really measuring our impact. We're one of the largest lenders to agriculture in the UK. It's almost 19% of the carbon emissions on my balance sheet of my lending. If I want to halve my emissions, I'm not going to stop lending to agriculture. What I need to do is work really closely with farmers, with the supply chain, to think about how do we make that more sustainable over time.
So net zero is really, obviously, very important. But it is not the only thing. And actually, I think it's caused a bit of an issue for nature because everything has been focused on net zero. What do we do about biodiversity?
Because climate change and nature loss are so interconnected, it is critical that we make our transition plans both net zero and nature positive. In this way, we can meet our urgent and internationally agreed obligations on climate and biodiversity.
When I'm talking to corporates and other regulators, we're not waiting for perfection. We know that you don't know all the answers, but you've got to get started. This is far too important to wait for perfect information.
It's often said that nature is more complex than climate, that there is no data, there isn't consistency on metrics. What we found through developing the TNFD framework is that businesses can already get started. It provides a framework that businesses and financial institutions can use to manage risks and to disclose information about those nature-related risks and opportunities.
Having critical information on risks paves the way for institutions to set science-based targets to reduce their impacts on nature.
Science-based targets for nature matter because unless we set credible, ambitious targets that we can be judged against, we think that we won't make fast enough progress. And so we've set some incredibly ambitious targets for how we as a retailer both encourage greater biodiversity, but also really thoughtful about how we protect nature in our supply chains.
Knowing what targets companies are working towards allows investors to revolutionize how they allocate money.
I've never understood why financial institutions finance intensive agriculture and ultimately finance things that deplete the very asset on which they're dependent for the viability of that investment long term.
For me, nature positive is a mindset. It's a guiding rule for how the board should think. Every decision that's made really should think about its consequences on nature, and also how nature itself provides constraints for the business's growth going forwards.
For a successful future, this means shifting capital away from investments that damage nature. We need to start by greening our investments.
Investors are in a unique position. They can actually attach some of the criteria for change to their investment.
As a large investment institution, we have an opportunity at the AGM to vote for good practice. There are various ways we can do that. One might be, for example, the board's reward structure, their board pay. Another might be the re-election of an individual director.
Many people believe that government needs to take the lead on environmental issues. Others think it is the business community, but they're both waiting for each other, which is why we need strong, independent environmental regulation.
We are asked by corporates, we're asked by consumers, we're asked by the companies, the investors, to get involved, help create standards, bring guardrails, make global consistency. So it does feel quite a strange place for a regulator to be wanted. Money is global, and global standards will help the flow of money move to the areas that it needs to, so that investment is part of the solution.
Regulations needn't hamper opportunity. They provide the guardrails for our investments, enabling us to be creative with the opportunities emerging in this revolution to a net zero and nature-positive economy.
There's tremendous opportunity in this. We've seen it with net zero. A whole industry's blossomed. We now need to see the same thing happen with nature.
There will be lots of innovative businesses and technologies emerging to address environmental crises in lots of different ways. So there'll be a huge amount of need to invest in research and development or proof of concept.
Banks can help provide the finance for new technology, new solutions, and we can help provide tools and insight and support.
It is as big as the first industrial revolution. The amount of money that could be made over the coming decade alone is estimated to be about $12 trillion. It's not a cost, it's an investment opportunity.
As our portfolios shift capital away from investments that damage nature, we will need to go one step further and invest in actively restoring it. Nature-based solutions are those that harness natural processes to solve a problem, often more economically than if we attempted it ourselves.
Peatlands are an example of nature as a form of capital. They are one of the biggest sinks of carbon on the land, and yet once they deteriorate, they can become emitters of carbon rather than sequestering it.
All ecosystems create value when they're healthy, but erode value when they're not. Therefore, investing in their restoration creates returns on many levels, such as capturing blue carbon in our marine environments.
So much of the oxygen that we're breathing on land is being replenished by countless trillions of plankton drifting in the surface of the sea. The oceans are also collecting a vast amount of carbon that's coming from industrial pollution and have been for centuries.
If we invest in the marine environment in the right way, we're going to protect communities from flooding, we're going to stop coastal erosion, we're going to have a positive impact on carbon sequestration. All of these things have a benefit for the businesses, but also for the communities that they are serving.
We've supported some national pilots where investors invest in the restoration of the natural environment at scale in order to secure future benefits of natural flood alleviation, carbon sequestration, or societal benefits like access to nature, education, and well-being. There are a multitude of bodies who will pay to receive those benefits, and ultimately then there is a financial return to the investors that have financed the landscape scale restoration.
There is evidence from the United States to suggest that for every £1 million invested in nature recovery, about 40 jobs are created. That's about 10 times as many as would be created through a similar investment in fossil fuels.
Imagine if the whole financial sector put its mind to innovations and thinking about how can we finance nature's recovery and create all of the benefits we take for granted from nature to economic outcomes that people are prepared to pay for.
As we embark on this ambitious future, where we understand our nature dependencies, risks and impacts, green our existing investments, and finance the restoration of nature at scale, our natural world and climate could become healthy once more. The question that remains is, can we achieve it?
But can I ask, are you hopeful for the future?
Sometimes.
Yeah, what to say?
It's not easy, but am I optimistic? Yes. This is the way forward. People have made the commitments, and this is the decade for actions.
I describe it as not being a competitive sport. This is something we all win or we all lose.
My sense of hope and optimism comes from the scale of action that I'm now seeing central banks and finance ministries discuss. They're not taking it yet, but they're beginning to discuss real action that would make a real difference.
Our financial system is entirely man-made, so I am hopeful that we can recreate something that is fit for purpose and fit for the planet.
Human beings are amazing. When we put our mind to something, we can fix it. So I'm not worried that we can't sort these issues. I'm worried that we won't do it in time.